The Kingston mansion stood tall that night, its marble pillars and golden chandeliers glowing faintly in the darkness. From the outside, it looked like a palace of dreams, the kind of place people imagined when they thought of endless riches. But inside it was a house of silence. A silence so heavy that even the sound of the heating system seemed loud. And in the middle of this silence was Clara Johnson. Clara was only 22, yet her eyes often looked older, tired, heavy, and worn. She had been on her feet since sunrise, scrubbing, dusting, washing, and serving. 14 hours without pause. Her body ached, her fingers were raw from the harsh soaps, and her stomach growled with hunger. But in the Kingston mansion, being tired was not an excuse. Rest was not a right. She was the maid. Nothing more. At least that's what everyone else believed. But Clara knew something no one else seemed to notice. On the living room floor, spread out on a thin blanket, were the Kingston twins. Tiny, fragile, barely 3 months old. Their pale blue onesies made their faces look even smaller, their arms flailing weakly as they fussed. Their mother was gone. She had died giving birth to them, leaving behind not only 2 newborn boys but also a husband who buried himself in work rather than face his grief. And so, the babies had no mother. And in truth, they had no father either. Nannies had come and gone, leaving within weeks, some even days. They said it was too much work, too much pressure. They said the mansion was too cold, too lifeless. And one by one they walked away. But Clara couldn't. She wasn't hired to care for babies. She wasn't paid for it either. Yet when the cries echoed through the nursery and no one came, Clara stepped in. She picked them up when they screamed. She fed them when their tiny mouths searched hungrily for comfort. She whispered lullabies her own mother used to sing when she was a child, soft and soothing, in a voice that carried warmth into the coldest corners of the mansion. Clara didn't mean to love them. But love has a way of growing in unexpected places. That night, however, love came with exhaustion. One of the twins was burning with fever. His small fists clenched tight. The other wailed so hard that his throat grew hoarse. Clara rocked one in her left arm while cradling the other in her right, pacing the floor for hours until her knees trembled. When at last their cries softened and their breathing grew steady, Clara felt her whole body sag. The nursery upstairs was freezing, the crib stiff and unwelcoming. She couldn't bring herself to leave them there. Not tonight. So she spread a thin blanket on the living room carpet, lay the babies down and curled beside them. She kept her hand close to their blanket as if guarding them, her tired eyes watching their small chests rise and fall. "I'll close my eyes for just a second," she whispered to herself. Her eyelids fluttered shut. But just then, the sound of the front door opening broke the silence. Clara jerked awake, her heart pounding. And there in the doorway stood Marcus Kingston, the billionaire owner of the mansion, tall and commanding in his tailored navy suit, his leather briefcase still in hand. His eyes widened, freezing at the sight before him. His maid, asleep on the floor. His sons, wrapped in a thin blanket at her side. For a long moment he didn't move. His expensive shoes remained fixed to the polished marble floor as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. Then his voice sliced through the silence. "What the hell is going on here?" Clara's pulse raced. She scrambled to sit upright, her hand instinctively hovering protectively over the babies. One of the twins whimpered at the sudden noise, shifting uneasily. Marcus's eyes, cold and sharp, fixed on her. He stepped closer, his voice low but harsh. "Why are my children on the floor? And why," he demanded, his jaw tightening, "are you lying there like that?" Clara opened her mouth, but no sound came. Her throat felt dry, her chest heavy. She glanced at the twins, then back at him, her lips trembling. And then Marcus noticed it. The faint bruise on her cheek. His eyes narrowed. "What happened to your face?" Clara froze, her heart hammering in her chest. She wanted to speak, to explain. But the words caught in her throat. Finally she whispered, her voice fragile yet steady enough to be heard. "They were crying. They needed someone." There's no nanny anymore. It's just me. For the first time Marcus faltered. His expression, hard as stone, flickered with something else. Something almost human. But the moment passed quickly. His tone remained cold. Come with me. My office. Now. Clara's chest tightened. She looked down at the sleeping twins, torn between obedience and the instinct to stay. But she had no choice. With slow, reluctant steps, she rose from the floor. Her knees ached. Her hands trembled. Still, she followed him into the darkened hallway. Behind her, the twins slept on. Innocent, unaware that the course of their lives and Clara's was about to change forever. The heavy oak doors of Marcus Kingston's office closed with a sharp thud, shutting Clara inside with him. The room was dimly lit, the fire in the hearth casting flickering shadows across the polished mahogany desk and leather chairs. It was a place of power, cold, intimidating, designed to remind anyone who entered that Marcus Kingston was a man not to be challenged. Clara stood near the door, her hands clasped tightly in front of her apron, her heart thudding like a drum. Marcus set his briefcase on the desk, removed his cufflinks with slow, deliberate movements, and then turned to face her. His dark eyes seemed to pierce through her. "Explain," he ordered. Clara swallowed hard. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "The twins. They haven't had proper care in weeks. The last nanny quit. Nobody replaced her. I stayed with them." Marcus's jaw clenched. He paced slowly, his footsteps echoing against the marble floor. "That still doesn't explain why my sons were on the living room floor. Why you were lying there." Clara's hands trembled. She forced herself to meet his gaze. "Because I was exhausted. I've worked since dawn. 14 hours without rest. I hadn't eaten. One of your boys had a fever tonight." The other cried until he nearly lost his voice. "When they finally calmed, I laid them somewhere warm. Somewhere safe." I closed my eyes for a moment. Her voice cracked. "I didn't mean to fall asleep. But I would do it again if it meant they felt comforted." For the first time, Marcus's expression shifted. His eyes softened for a fraction of a second, but only for a second. He quickly masked it with a stern glare. Then his gaze fell back to the faint bruise on her cheek. "And that?" His voice was quieter but sharper. "Who did that to you?" Clara froze. She hesitated, her throat tightening with fear. Finally, she whispered. "One of your guests. During the party last week. He shoved me when I got in his way. Fell. Nobody noticed." Her voice trembled. "Or maybe they did. But nobody cared." Marcus stopped pacing. His shoulders stiffened. He remembered that night. The champagne, the laughter, the careless arrogance of his wealthy friends. His face hardened. "You should have told me." Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. Her eyes glistened as she whispered. "Would it have mattered? You don't see them, Mr. Kingston. You don't even see your own children. All they have is me. And even I." She took a shaky breath. "I'm nothing here. I'm just the help." Her words hung heavy in the air. Marcus turned to the window, his reflection ghostly in the firelight. For the first time in months, something stirred inside him, memories he had buried deep. His wife's laughter echoing in the gardens, her hand gripping his when the twins were born, the way he had kissed her forehead, promising he'd always protect their children. And then the silence after she was gone. He had chosen work over grief, business over family. And now, here stood Clara, a young maid with tired eyes, reminding him of the truth he didn't want to face. His voice was low when he finally spoke. "Stay here." Clara blinked, confused. She didn't move. Marcus left the office, his footsteps echoing down the hall. She stood frozen, wondering if she had gone too far, if she had just destroyed whatever fragile thread kept her job. Minutes later, the sound of his footsteps returned. When Marcus re-entered the office, he wasn't alone. In his arms were 2 small blankets, the twins' nursery bedding. Clara's breath caught as she watched him. The billionaire, who had barely glanced at his sons since their birth, now bent down and gently draped the blankets over their tiny bodies in the living room. His hands, usually so steady with contracts and deals, trembled slightly as he tucked the fabric around them. "They're smaller than I remember," he murmured, his voice breaking ever so slightly. His hand hovered above their tiny heads, afraid to touch yet desperate to connect. Clara stepped closer, her tone soft, almost motherly. "They don't need perfection. They just need you. Not your money. Not your name. You." Marcus lifted his gaze to hers. For the first time, his eyes weren't cold. They were filled with something deeper. Guilt, pain, and perhaps the faintest glimmer of hope. "I've been a coward," he admitted, his voice rough. "I thought if I worked hard enough, stayed busy enough, I wouldn't have to feel the loss. But in doing that, failed them. And I failed you." Silence filled the mansion again. But this silence was different. Less heavy, more fragile. Like the beginning of a change. When Marcus finally stood, his voice was steady. "Things changed tonight. You are no longer just the maid. From now on, you'll be their official caregiver. You'll be paid fairly. And the man who laid a hand on you will never set foot in this house again." Clara's chest tightened, tears stinging her eyes. "Why?" she whispered. Marcus looked at her, his voice softer now. "Because you protected my children when I didn't. And I will not fail them, or you, again." In that moment, Clara realized something. Behind the billionaire's cold armor was not just grief, but a man who had been too afraid to face his own pain. And perhaps for the first time he was ready to change. The days that followed were unlike any Clara had ever known inside the Kingston mansion. The cold, lifeless silence that once hung over its marble floors began to fade, replaced by the soft sounds of laughter and tiny coos from the twins. It was subtle at first, Marcus lingering a little longer in the mornings before heading to the office, his large frame awkwardly hunched over the crib as he watched his sons sleep. Clara noticed the small changes. The once distant man now asked questions. "How are they eating? Did the fever break? Do they sleep better if the light is left on?" Each question was clumsy, uncertain, but it came from somewhere real. One morning, Clara found him in the nursery, sitting in the rocking chair, one of the twins nestled against his chest. The billionaire's eyes were half closed, exhaustion etched into his features, but his arms were firm, protective. He looked up at her with the faintest smile. "He wouldn't sleep unless I held him," Marcus whispered, as though admitting to a weakness. Clara's lips curved into a soft smile. "Sometimes that's all they need. Just to feel safe." Marcus glanced down at the boy in his arms. "I didn't know it could feel like this." His voice cracked slightly, betraying the emotions he kept locked away. For Clara, the change felt like a miracle. Weeks passed, and the mansion transformed. The cold dining hall, once filled only with the clinking of Marcus's silverware, now carried the gentle hum of Clara's lullabies as she fed the twins. The living room, once sterile and untouched, became a safe haven of toys, blankets, and warmth. And Marcus, he changed most of all. He began arriving home earlier, trading late-night meetings for evenings spent lying on the floor with his sons, laughing as they kicked their tiny feet. For the first time since his wife's passing, the house felt alive again. One rainy afternoon, Clara sat curled on the sofa, a twin resting in each arm. Their little bodies pressed against her, warm and trusting. Outside, raindrops tapped softly against the tall windows. The front door opened and Marcus stepped inside. His jacket was draped casually over his shoulder. His tie loosened. He stopped in the doorway, watching her. For a long moment he said nothing. His eyes softened at the sight of his sons asleep in her arms, the very picture of peace he hadn't thought possible in this house again. Finally he spoke, his voice gentle. "Room for one more." Clara looked up, startled. Then slowly she smiled and nodded. Marcus crossed the room, his tall frame lowering beside her on the sofa. He reached out and carefully, she shifted one of the babies into his arms. The sight was almost surreal. The billionaire who once shut himself away from grief now cradled his son with tenderness, his thumb brushing gently against the baby's tiny hand. Clara watched him, her chest tightening. Not with fear this time, but with something else. Something she hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe. That evening, all four of them remained in the living room. The storm outside raged on, thunder rolling through the skies, but inside, the warmth was undeniable. Clara leaned back, exhaustion pulling at her, but she didn't fight it. The twins were safe. She was safe. And Marcus was there. Eventually, the babies drifted into deeper sleep. Clara's eyes fluttered shut as well, her head resting against the back of the sofa. Marcus glanced down at the small family gathered around him, the family he almost lost to his own blindness. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "I won't fail you again." From that day forward, the Kingston mansion was never the same. It wasn't wealth or grandeur that filled its halls, but something stronger. Something Clara had brought with her from the moment she chose to protect the twins. Love. Because family, Clara realized, isn't about bloodlines or titles. It's about showing up when it matters most. And now, at last, they all had a family. Together,